Hello and welcome to the Days of Yore. Today we'll be talking about the celebratory picnic that took place on Beaubears Island on the 31st of July 1872 and that picnic's relationship with the federal election of that same year. My sources today come from a number of different places, a lot of newspapers, but also some recollections from some of the principal participants, most notably Peter Mitchell, and a UNB thesis written about Mr. Mitchell and his contributions politically to Canada. So let's begin. And we'll start by speaking a little bit about the context of picnics on the island, because the picnic in 1872 was by no means the first. Picnics on Beaubears Island began in about 1857, during the time when the Harleys owned Beaubears Island, after the dissolution of the partnership between Harley and Burchell, John Harley and George Burchell. And so the Harley family were the first hosts on Beaubears Island. And on August the 4th, 1857, they welcomed the students of St. Andrew's Sabbath School. And they were ferried by George B. Bell, and the aim of this picnic in early August of 1857 was to try to foster friendships and relationships between children of the various parts of the Miramichi area. So young people from Newcastle and Chatham and Douglastown and Nelson all coming together in order to, like I say, form those bonds of friendship, which today, seems, a little bit of a foregone conclusion that those friendships would form. But of course, in our motorized age, it's much easier for young people, different places, to come together. Not so much so in 1857. So it's estimated that about 300 people came to this particular picnic. So pretty impressive to start off with. 300 people on that very first picnic. And 2 weeks later, another group of young people came, this time from St. Paul's Sabbath School. Now, in this particular picnic, the Harley operation really kind of got into it. I guess they had seen the success of that initial picnic, and now they wanted to kind of add a bit of a layer to the experience. So John Harley, he sends men off of the shipyard in order to construct tables and swings and amusements for these young people. So again, this is something where the Harleys are really committing to picnicking on Beaubears Island. It's becoming something that is very important to them. So basically, in 1861, they host another picnic, this time from the established Church of Scotland, with 575 guests. Football and other games take place at this particular picnic. Again, and recreation, from swings and other things that have been built by the Harley shipyard workers are readily engaged in. And 3 cheers are offered by all those assembled for the Harley family and their success. Unfortunately, John Harley and his operation were not the last on Beaubears Island. That, of course, is a story for another day. But in 1866, John Harley lost Beaubears Island to the commercial bank because he was unable to pay his debts to the bank at that time. In 1867, the Chatham Cathedral, so St. Michael's, hosted a big picnic on the island as well. So people traveled from as far away as Oak Point in order to attend this particular picnic. Again, foot races, sack races, hurdle races were conducted for prizes. At this time, it might be a bit of interest, at this time, passage to the island, admission to the picnic, all-inclusive package, transport, admission, and food, 60 cents. So again, a pretty good deal. So at that time. So in 1869, 500 guests visited Beaubears Island aboard the steamer Rothsay. They dined for about an hour, took their leisure, and left after a rousing rendition by the Chatham Brass Band. So things were changing on Beaubears Island around this time. In 1871, the island was no longer owned by the commercial bank. A new owner had stepped to the forefront. This was Peter Mitchell. Mitchell had been a shipbuilder in his own time with his brother-in-law John Hawes for a number of years in Newcastle. Mitchell, of course, is most notably remembered as a politician, representative here provincially and later federally, and one of the 36 Fathers of Confederation and the first Minister of Fisheries in the first Canadian government. So you have to imagine that in 1871, when Peter Mitchell buys Beaubears Island, the area is in a bit of an economic slump. For 5 years, there has been no industry to speak of on Beaubears Island. Well, Peter Mitchell is able to inject a bit of life into the island in this way. Now, this is because Peter Mitchell knows that the Intercolonial Railway will be crossing the Miramichi River just above Beaubears Island, and 2 bridges are going to need to be built so that the ICR can cross both branches of the Miramichi River. So on the one hand, that's great news for workers who are at this point unemployed on Beaubears Island. On the other hand, it's also a bit of insider dealing. Peter Mitchell knows at this point that, yeah, he can use his government knowledge in order to buy up property close by the construction site so that he can take advantage. So a bit of double dealing there, but maybe some double dealing that from a certain perspective benefited some workers in the area, but probably benefited Peter Mitchell a little bit more. So Mitchell also was the first owner to really understand the island as a recreational space. So yes, it's true. John and Ann Harley did use the island in this way, but they used it somewhat infrequently. You're seeing years between, obviously weeks between the first 2 picnics, but years between those 2 picnics in 1857 and subsequent picnics in 1861, and so on and so forth. It wasn't something that they were focused on. When they did do picnics, they were all in, but picnics were a more infrequent affair. Peter Mitchell really wanted to use the scenic beauty of Beaubears Island really kind of for political ends and to a political purpose. And he really got his first chance in 1872. So as I mentioned, in 1872, a federal election was held. This was the second federal election in what was then known and understood as the Dominion of Canada. So in this particular election, Peter Mitchell was going to run for the first time to represent Northumberland County in the House of Commons. So a bit of background here. In the first federal election in 1867, Northumberland County was to be represented by Peter Mitchell's political ally, his former legal partner, former Attorney General for the province of New Brunswick, and another Father of Confederation, John Mercer Johnson. Johnson was the first MP for Northumberland County. Unfortunately, in 1868, he died. And in a by-election, an anti-Confederation candidate, Richard Hutchison, was elected. Now, to hear the story, Peter Mitchell was asked by John Macdonald, the Prime Minister at the time, to run, because he was the only candidate capable of winning Northumberland County for the government. So Peter Mitchell had gone to Ottawa too in 1867, but he had gone as a senator. He was sitting in the upper house. Now, he had been a senator sitting in the upper house of New Brunswick in the Legislative Council from about 1861 until the time of Confederation. But Peter Mitchell did not really care for the Senate in any meaningful way. He felt that the Senate really had no purpose. Years later, in 1866, he would say that the Senate represented nobody and nothing. It was a party hospital where the blind and the lame could be collected together. It was, in many ways, he said in 1866, really a political museum where fossils could be seen. So those are some pretty strong words. I mean, Peter Mitchell had some pretty strong words about almost anything, but definitely some strong words in condemnation of the Senate's, I guess, limited ability and non-elected status. So perhaps Peter Mitchell also himself yearned to be in the lower house, in the House of Commons, where perhaps he felt real work was being done. Peter Mitchell at this time also was pretty much at the height of his political success. As the Minister of Fisheries, he had done a great deal to streamline various provincial and regional fishing regulations to form a national policy, and he had defended Canadian fishing rights against the Americans, resulting in the Washington Treaty, the first successful attempt by Canada to assert its own sovereignty. So, riding high on this, Peter Mitchell went into the 1872 federal election and was successful. As a matter of fact, he was acclaimed. No one ran against Peter Mitchell in that particular election. So to celebrate, in 1872, on July the 31st, a picnic was held on Beaubears Island. So this picnic would be the largest picnic ever held on the island and likely the most successful. So, 3 steamers, there's the New Era, the Laddie, and the Druid, were engaged to travel all day to bring visitors from pretty much the length and breadth of the Miramichi River to this picnic. Now, it's said that every time those steamers landed on Beaubears Island, they were at full capacity. Newspapers at the time said that it really didn't matter, or the political stripe of that time, whether one was a liberal or a conservative or a supporter of Confederation or a detractor against Confederation. That was largely forgotten. And pretty much everybody attended this picnic. Now, as a matter of fact, so many people attended this picnic that there were reports that a lot of people who weren't invited also showed up in order to congratulate Peter Mitchell on his electoral victory. More likely, they came because, unlike most picnics, the food was all for free. Most picnics served no food and encouraged people to bring their own. But on this occasion, the food was provided at no cost. So whether you were a supporter of Peter Mitchell or not, whether you believed in what he stood for or not, one would guess that you might show up to have a free meal with a lot of people, and a great outdoor day. The band of the 73rd Battalion of the New Brunswick Militia was on hand and to play. And by 2 in the afternoon, it was estimated that 3,000 people had come to celebrate with Peter Mitchell on Beaubears Island, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. The largest event I think that we've ever had on Beaubears Island in the time that we've been operating has had about 250, 275 people. So again, I mean, you're talking something 10 times and more that size. So, oddly enough, that throughout this day, with so many people there, the one person that quite a few people could not find on that day was the guest of honor. Peter Mitchell, it seems, was missing. Now, there is some debate as to whether Peter Mitchell was simply late, whether perhaps in the midst of 3,000 people, perhaps he was just lost in the shuffle. However, we do see that in some press coverage of this event, especially in the St. John papers, there were reports that there was a lot of alcohol present at this picnic. Now, of course, on the face of it, this picnic was to be conducted under strict temperance guidelines. And I'm only guessing here, this was probably in deference to the climate at the time, but also in deference to Isabella Mitchell, Peter Mitchell's wife, who herself was a longtime advocate for temperance and prohibition here in the area. This was probably because her husband was a police officer who was murdered due to an alcohol-related offense, as I understand it. And so, perhaps in deference to her, this picnic was conducted under strict temperance guidelines. That being said, Peter Mitchell himself was well known as somebody who felt very strongly the other way. Was definitely somebody who believed in alcohol as not a vice in any way. So Peter Mitchell was known for being quite at variance with the opinion on temperance. Peter Mitchell was, of course, the son of a barman, so he understood alcohol in a much different way than his wife did. At the same time, he also used alcohol as a political tool, often exchanging rum for votes throughout his political career. And so I guess it's somewhat speculated that perhaps Peter Mitchell was with his friends on the other side of the island, enjoying a bit of an adult beverage, as it were. So perhaps he enjoyed it a bit too long, because by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the guests were getting a little restless. They were getting ready to leave. And Peter Mitchell still had not come and addressed the entire assembly. But like the Beatles, Peter Mitchell got by with a little help from his friends. So his good friend John Nevin came out and gathered everyone together, made a speech about what a lovely day it was and how great it was to see everybody. And the need for more political activity in the populace, for more people to step forward. After him, the provincial representative from Northumberland County, Jacob Carvel Goff, who, as it happened, was Peter Mitchell's stepson, also came forward, and he addressed the people for a time. And newspaper accounts said that he was equal parts amusing and eloquent. Finally, Peter Mitchell himself came and addressed all those assembled. Now, Mitchell expressed his gratification with all that had happened on that day. He said that whatever he had done for the people of Northumberland County, that it was something like this that was the only recompense that he required. This kind of support from his constituents was really the only thing that he really needed in exchange for his public service. He said the day would remain in his memory for many a long year to come, and it would only encourage him to persevere. So it was a great day, a great success for Peter Mitchell. That being said, most historians agree that 1872 was the high water mark for Peter Mitchell's political career. As Minister of Fisheries, he had done a great deal, but it was all that he was going to do politically. That being said, Peter Mitchell was no less interesting for being somebody that wasn't as successful or that was out of power. In 1873, when the federal government fell over the Pacific Scandal, Peter Mitchell was the only member of the cabinet who flat out refused to follow John Macdonald as the leader of the Conservative Party. And deciding that he could not stay with the Conservative Party, and saying that he would not support the Liberal Party of Alexander Mackenzie, he he sat as an independent for the remainder of his political career. Why would he do this? Many people say that this was a stupid move, that Peter Mitchell sacrificed the goodwill of both major parties in Parliament and sat alone, was thought to be loyal to no man. But perhaps I would argue that the big success that he enjoyed on Beaubears Island in 1872 really was the kind of thing that drove Peter Mitchell to make a decision like this. That he could sit as an independent, that he personally had enough support here in the county that he could retain his seat and that he could still be a voice for the people of the area and for his constituents. Now, again, history seems to have borne him out in that respect. Peter Mitchell was, again, successful up until, with one exception, in the 1878 election. He was successful in the 1882 and 1887 elections and will continue to be active in politics until 1896. So, was it all worth it? Who knows? That's a story for another day. I'm sure we'll be back talking about Peter Mitchell in a subsequent episode. But I think today that's where we'll leave it. Next week I'll turn you over to another bearded gentleman, my colleague Ken Walker. But for now, I'd like to remind you that Days of Yore is a presentation of this channel, and we welcome any support that you can give us, be it a subscription, a like, so on and so forth. If you'd like to support us in that next level, please do consider having a look at our Patreon page and supporting us in that way. We would certainly be grateful. Well, as I say, we'll leave it there for this week. For the Days of Yore, I've been Dr. Sean McCarthy. See you in a little bit.